Well, let me add my words of welcome to you this morning. Good to have you here. Nice to have a few folks visiting from Hurstbridge. I don't know how many of you heard the weather report coming today, but I hope the Wattle Festival survives what is, they say, is heading our direction. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how that goes, but great opportunity for them. And I want to thank some of you who have been asking me this morning. You noticed that Sue's seat is empty this morning, and many of you have been praying for her. And she has been experiencing a health concern with a nerve that comes out of her back. And those of you who were at the women's retreat realize that she was experiencing something then. And what happens, she is not in pain or discomfort, and that's actually part of the problem. Her leg just goes numb, and then she can't use it, and suddenly she can't walk. And so suddenly, that's where she is right now. She is not in pain, but pain would actually, in some ways, be a good thing because the leg is just suddenly gone, and she stands up and realizes, I don't have a leg. And so she, you know what happens when you don't have a leg. You can't walk, she can't get around, but anyway, we have a meeting tomorrow with a surgeon to begin to get some answers to some of these questions, but it's been a challenging season around our home. Some of you have been through seasons like that, and it's difficult. I ask you to pray for my dear wife. She doesn't do well at sitting around, and she's having to do a lot of sitting around, and yeah. So thank you for understanding. So we are this morning not really pausing in our series in Joseph. We want to revisit chapter 37 a little bit as we look at what we have looked at the last couple of weeks from a different perspective. A number of you have shared your stories with me of your difficulties and the question, where is God in this? I wonder. How is God making sense of this story? Well, I want to revisit chapter 37, and hopefully we can begin to get a glimpse of how God, in his seeming absence, is very present in the midst of these stories. We're going to revisit Genesis 37, so if you have your copy of the scriptures, turn to that passage. And I want to encourage you as well. We have these cards made up. Thank you, Robin, for putting these together so you can follow along with the reading in our series. There are some back there on the table, and I bet it's also on the church app. Click on one of those buttons, and Robin will show you which one, but follow along in that. So let's open our hearts to God as we open his word. Here we are, Father, this morning, calling on the God of Jacob. Calling on the God of David, the God of Moses, the God of Mary. And we can put our own names in there. You're the God of Tom and the God of Sue, the God of Ross and Heather, the God of Andrew and Shireen, the God of all of us. And we call on you this morning. And we ask, as we open your word, that you would once again be very present with us and help us to be present with you. By your Spirit, teach us, guide us into truth, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. Funny little thing about me, I love a good mystery. How many of us love a good mystery? I saw some hands go up really fast right there. I love a good mystery. When I want a good book to escape into for entertainment, or if I'm just craving a good story, often my choice will be a good Agatha Christie whodunit. Pure escapism, a good story, but the element of wondering what is going to happen next keeps me engaged, keeps me wondering, keeps me guessing, and trying to figure out those clues along the way. What was the motive? What was the means? What was the opportunity? Who was it that hated that person so much? Or what was it that drove them to do what they did? But as the plot unfolds in a good mystery, the stories of the people involved in that come out as well. The events of their past come into the present, and they shape the course of the future. One thing about a good mystery is that it teaches us something about life. Too often we think of a mystery as something that simply can't be known. We might say something is a mystery to me, which means I don't have any idea how that works. But see, understanding a good mystery story helps me to realize that oftentimes the elements of that story are right there in front of me. They're right before my eyes. They're right there. The clues are sitting in the room, but it sometimes takes time to understand what all those pieces mean. The truth of the story is pieced together one small clue at a time. It unfolds bit by bit, clue by clue, until finally the solution is revealed. And often we realize that the key that unlocked the mystery was sitting right there the whole time. If we only took the time to stop and notice, to pay attention. What is true in understanding a good mystery novel, I believe, is true in our spiritual life as well. One of the great mysteries of God is His sovereignty. That may be a big theological word that you may or may not be able to define, but you certainly understand the reality of it. You live with it day by day. And if we were all honest, we would admit that we wrestle with it and we wish we could understand it better. I was reflecting recently on the words of the wisdom writer in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. Consider the work of God. Who can make straight what He has made crooked? In the day of prosperity, be joyful. And in the day of adversity, consider. God has made the one as well as the other, so that man may not find out anything that will be after him. God allows both prosperity and adversity. I don't understand that, but it's there. In the good times, the wisdom writer says, be joyful, and I get that. And thank you, Katie, for asking for those joyful stories. We need to share those. In the good times, be joyful, but in the difficult days, notice he doesn't say, stop and be sad. There is a time for that, certainly. But in the difficult days, he says, stop and consider. Stop and reflect. Stop and pay attention how this is also allowed by God. Something here is concealed. Stop and reflect on that. Ponder that. There is a mystery here which only God understands, but we must rest in this truth. He conceals the future. He unfolds the story one clue at a time so that we will learn to trust him. God's sovereignty is an expression of his wisdom as much as it is an expression of his love. So we're looking at the story of Joseph and the way God redeems Joseph's story. And as we go further and further into the story, we will discover there is more and more and more to be redeemed. We've already seen a bit of that in chapter 37. Believe me, there's plenty more to come. It's the same way God redeems our stories. He is present in the story, and he invites us to, as the wisdom writer says, pause, reflect, consider the ways he is at work, shaping us and forming us into the people that he desires us to be. So today we want to pause and look at 4 glimpses of God's sovereignty in this first part of Joseph's story. We've looked at it largely from Joseph's perspective. Let's go back and revisit it from God's perspective to see this from a different angle. It's a little bit of a recap, I admit, but we want to get another clue to this unfolding mystery that is before us, and it is the mystery of God's sovereignty in the midst of Joseph's experience. The first clue, the first scene we want to look at, those dreams that Joseph has, those 2 dreams. The dreams themselves are actually quite easy to understand. It doesn't take a lot of brains to figure out what's going on there. That's part of the problem, is they understand fully what's going on. That's what creates the tension. That's what got Joseph into so much trouble with his brothers. They got the point of the message. But what they didn't pause to consider was what or who was behind the dream. Where did it come from? The obvious answer is that the dream came from God himself. Joseph received the dream and he communicated it to others, but Joseph did not create the dream. It was not something from his own imagination. It wasn't necessarily even something from his own desires. Joseph's dreams remind us of an important truth in God's sovereignty. He knows the end of the story even from the very beginning. He knows how this story is going to end. The story will unfold to us over time, but God lives in the fullness of the story at all times. These dreams are an important clue to us right at the very beginning of Joseph's story, telling us that everything that is about to unfold is under the watchful eye of God and happens according to His sovereign will. We don't know what to expect. We don't know how this is going to unfold. God gives just enough information so that we have to wait on Him. We have to learn to trust Him. Where is this going? Well, God knows. The dreams are a reminder to Joseph that God knows how this story is going to end, though it will be a story that takes a number of surprising turns along the way. We want to rush. We want to get to the end of it. But God says, slow down and join me on this journey. And trust me along the way. It reminds me, too, that God always plays, as I sometimes say, God plays the long game. We want things resolved quickly. We want things resolved immediately. God's patience is an expression of His grace. He not only allows the end of the story, now, He not only knows the end of the story, but He knows the way to get there. We don't. There's a second scene that follows after this. Scene 2, God provides an advisor. Verses 15 through 17, Joseph is sent out to look for his brothers, but they are not in the place where he expected to find them. And a man comes along and asks Joseph, what are you looking for? Well, I'm looking for my brothers, but they aren't here. They're not in the place where I thought I would find them. And the man replies in verse 17, well, they've gone away, for I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. They've moved on to another pasture. They're not in this place because I heard them say they were going over to this other place, and that's where they are. It's such a simple little scene. We could skip over it very easily, couldn't we? They just, he's not here, okay, so let's go over there. But again, it's another clue in our mystery of the sovereignty of God. A simple coincidence? I don't think so. The man overheard the brothers say where they were going, and the man passes that along to Joseph. Simple coincidences sometimes reveal God's wisdom in very accessible and understandable ways. When Sue and I were missionaries, we had a year-long home assignment back in the States to help our son get settled in university. And while we were there, I was asked to speak in a student chapel at Biola University. And a dear friend of ours, whom we had known for years, came along to that chapel service. She hadn't heard me speak for a while. She just wanted to be around, hang out with us, and so she came along. I reflect on that one message. I don't even remember what I preached on that day, just a message. But it was an interesting thing. That single moment was a turning point in our lives. At the end of that, our friend made the observation of what she saw, what she observed. She said, I saw those students and you connect with each other in a very unusual way. I think I told her to stop talking. Sue then made the same comment. Well, I didn't want to hear any of that because I wanted to go back to China, continue our work there. But over time, it became apparent that God was using that simple comment to convey a message to me, to convey His will, and I needed to listen to what they had to say. It led to a season of discernment and a change in my path, ultimately leading me to teach at Biola, ultimately leading me to MST and to here. It all started with one little message in a university chapel and one comment from a friend afterwards. Coincidence? I don't think so. No, it was God's sovereign voice speaking through an advisor, a person, making a simple comment, getting my attention, and leading to a season of discernment. The third scene comes just after that, where he finally meets up with his brothers. The brothers see Joseph coming along. They are guided by their hatred, and they begin to devise a plan to kill him. But in verse 21, Reuben, one of the brothers, hears it, and he rescues him out of their hands, saying, let's not take his life. No, let's do something different. And so let's don't kill him. Let's just throw him into this pit. It's a well which just happens not to have any water in it, as Dan shared with us last week. A dry well? He is one voice in the midst of all of these brothers, but for some reason they listen to him and they change their plan. For a moment there, it looks like the end of the story. But God provides a protector to spare Joseph's life. Another clue that he is looking out for Joseph, and his plan cannot be undone. Or as the wisdom writer put it, who can make straight what God has made crooked? Or who can make crooked what God makes straight? Who can undo what God has willed? There's a fourth scene. We will begin to see how this unfolds in the continuing story. Joseph is sold to these Midianites who take him to Egypt and who sell him to Potiphar. It all looks pretty dire. Selling someone like a piece of furniture, like a commodity. I hope that sounds shocking. It's shocking to me. Selling people. It's a shocking series of events from our perspective. But it ultimately lands Joseph in a place of refuge, a place of safety. And as we go along in the story, Egypt becomes an important part of that story. It would ultimately become a place of refuge for all of God's people, and it would become an important part of the story for the rest of their lives and in their history. The mystery of God's sovereignty is being revealed clue by clue, step by step, all through this story. If we will stop and ponder and reflect what's going on here. What is God's sovereignty? Here's how one of my mentors describes it. Sovereignty means our all-wise, all-knowing God reigns in realms beyond our comprehension to bring about a plan beyond our ability to alter or hinder or stop. Let me say that again. Sovereignty means that our all-wise and all-knowing God reigns in realms beyond our comprehension to bring about a plan beyond our ability to alter or hinder or stop. God's sovereignty is an expression of his wisdom. It is an expression of his love, and it is certainly an expression of his power. And it means that regardless of what is going on in the confusing story of my life, I can trust him, even when I don't understand. God conceals the future so that we will learn to trust him. If I don't know, and I often don't know, just as you often don't know, then I look to the one who does. And because God's sovereignty is always an expression of his love, even when I don't understand his ways, I can always trust his heart. So how does all of this fit with the story of Joseph? And how does it fit with the story of your life and the story of my life? It is only because God is sovereign that he can redeem Joseph's story. It is only because God is sovereign that he can redeem my story and he can redeem your story. I love that word, redeem. In simple language, it means that God takes the messiness of our lives and he makes something good out of it. My grandmother was one of those remarkable people who could take a pile of scraps of cloth or yarn and make something not only useful, but beautiful out of it. Scraps of cloth became colorful quilts. Bits of yarn would become a lap blanket to keep your legs warm. I once watched her take a pile of apple cores and apple skins. She had made something and she saved the apple cores and the seeds and the skins. And I said, "What are you going to do with that?" And she said, "Oh, this makes the best jelly. Apple jelly." She would take the stuff that other people would throw away, and it would become something not just useful, but something beautiful or delicious. She knew how to redeem what seemed to be lost and useless and bring it back to life. That's what God's sovereignty does with our stories. That challenging relationship that you work on, well, that's what teaches me to be gracious and forgiving. The chronic pain that I have lived with for 50 years, it teaches me to trust God and not myself. Those long seasons in the wilderness, spiritual dryness, well, that's where patience comes from. The mystery of God's sovereignty means that he can take all those fragments and scraps, the stuff we find useless, and he can redeem it. He can make something beautiful out of a life that trusts him. No one can overturn what God does. We can only submit to his providence. And when we don't understand his ways, we can always trust his heart. He is forming us into people who can live naturally in his presence, who can trust his heart, who can seek his will, who can choose his way. I learned to give myself fully to the God who has given himself fully to me. I've asked Katie if she could come and lead us in a time of reflection at the end of this, because I know there are a lot of stories that God can redeem. And so I want us to reflect, as the wisdom writer says, stop and consider. And Katie's going to help us do that.
I just encourage you to take a big